All right, so we're recording at 6:02, and the regular meeting of the Racial Equity and Justice Task Force on June 29th, we're officially calling it to order. And Ryan, just for the record, Bev is not here. And that's everyone from the group. Oh, Tamisha, I'm sorry, Tamisha's not here.
Okay.
So first order of business is the approval of minutes from the June 1st regular meeting. Is there a motion to approve?
I move to approve.
Gina moves to approve. Is there a second? Sandra seconds. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Steve, are you in favor? No vote from Steve. Any abstentions? Okay.
So Ryan wrote a note, minutes from our special meeting last week.
Right. I didn't add them. We'll add them to the next time to approve, because by the time I downloaded, I didn't want to send a third revision.
Gotcha.
So Steve, sorry, Steve gave the thumbs up on the minutes, Ryan. I don't know if you saw it. So that passes unanimously. So we're going to turn it right over to Karen for a presentation, for an update on the Board of Selectmen presentation that she gave. And Doug was on the phone. Oh, I'm sorry. Innie is also not here. And Innie was also on the call. So we'll start with Karen,
Yep.
and then Doug, if you have anything to add, and then if there are questions.
So yeah, let's see, I forgot about that part. I would think overall it went quite well. And I guess what I mean by that is it felt good to be able to recap all of the work that we've done to date and actually kind of listing it out and then saying out loud for the Board of Selectmen meeting. If you haven't all had a chance to listen to it, you might want to go and do that. Like, it just was the cumulative list of all of the things that we've done felt very validating to the level of kind of effort we all feel has been happening within this group. So, recapped all the work that we've done to date, and then explained, including some of the people that came to talk to us, via Zoom, of course, but did right down to the folks from CCM and the Equity Toolkit kit that kind of modeled our blueprint. I did not show our blueprint. I simply showed the toolkit and or talked through the toolkit, and then we did get some, I would say, some concerns. The first one, well, they were more around the round table. Like, let me just try to get straight. The concerns that came up, like from Brenda, were all about the round table, which we'll get to in a minute, but that also went off without a hitch after all is said and done. But the Tom Flynn really brought up, back to that, Doug, what did you even message me about it afterwards? It's like the need for data and, the importance of data, and we really want data. So anyway,
Which we have.
Which we
were able to say.
And even though I had said that we have some data and we did some data collecting, he was like, we're really going to need the data. So he just, wants to be able to have some sort of factual information, not just the stories and firsthand accounts that we learned through our interviewing efforts. But yeah, I mean, other than that, I think it went well. I think there is going to be, a lot of questions about it once we get to the, let's present what we have point of view. But I think that we got the information that we wanted out of it, which is really just what are they expecting from us in terms of where we're at. And, jury is still out on how receptive they will be to the actual blueprint once we present it. I also shared that, we've gotten some forward motion working with the police department, which I think was reaffirming to them that we've made these great strides working with the chief and Lieutenant Esposito. And I also shared with them kind of there's an outpouring from the community of wanting us to be involved with certain other things that go beyond just the construction of the blueprint. So we have to let Tamisha in. So anyway, so anything else, Doug, that you can think of that would be worth sharing out with the same group, or Nancy, anything else other than that recap worth sharing with the whole group? Feels like 6 weeks ago.
Yeah.
I actually thought, this is Doug Bunnell. I thought did a great job at summarizing what we've done. I thought you threaded the needle on trying to, say some stuff without confronting anyone. I thought giving them the police department shift and how we've been invited in was a really good way to just demonstrate we've already had an impact that way. My concern that I texted you and misused the names, but there is this ongoing demand or request for data. And I think certain people on the Board of Selectmen think data means numbers and that's all that it means. And if we don't demonstrate numbers, then we're just telling, excuse me, telling stories. And that's not real data. And I just thought this almost catch-22 thing where we're not going to invest resources to get data until you can show us the data.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I think we just thinking about how we, shape the report of the blueprint to really stress that we are looking to create a process to collect high quality data, but it's beyond the scope of this committee right now as we're constituted to do that.
Yeah, I think that it's worth having, putting out the very specific question of when you say data, what are you, what type of data are you looking for specifically? Because qualitative data is data. And I don't know if the data, if what you're looking for is that there is a percentage, like is there a percentage that you need to hear?
So I think actually on the call, one of the members of the Board of Selectmen did sort of say that specifically, like we're looking for number of traffic stops. And I think they used the traffic stop example. And I said, we have that. And I said, there are going to be those people. And I think we all have to just come to terms with that in our own way, for whom this group of this blueprint will not resonate. It will not be it won't be enough. It won't have enough of those numbers. They will discount, perhaps. There are people who may discount some of the anecdotal evidence. We did address that. In fact, there was also a question around the CCM report, which came up. And Brenda had actually asked about that information. We said it's all online.
She said, is this, if I recall, what she thought was that was Connecticut, not Fairfield.
Yeah, and so we just reminded her that in fact it was Fairfield and that all of this has been done in the light of day.
Yeah, well, I think too, like, specific, to that question, like the data exists. If it exists, we have it. So those numbers are there. Like if you want the number of traffic stops, you actually have had them for 4 years, but we're happy to put them in this format here. So we can use the numbers that we have. I just, I think the numbers that we have to use are the ones that are in existence, because otherwise, we're just not data scientists in the way that.
And we talked about that. At a certain point, I think I even made the comment that we've talked about. I think people in the community are really looking for us to be a group that has actionable power, where something happens and then we can respond and act accordingly. And that's decidedly what we are not. And so we talked about, I said it was a personal feeling. I did not say this on behalf of the group, but I said I felt others agreed with me, that at a certain point we're doing more harm than good. That at a certain point we're going to have to turn in this blueprint so that a permanent task force can take over, so that it can become a group that takes action. So I sort of planted the seed there. I think Karen did, I just want to reiterate, Karen did an excellent job of summarizing this incredible breadth of work, the data collection, the deep listening project, the fact that we have talked to so many stakeholders. We did talk about the upcoming community conversation, and Karen really did a great job. And listening to it, it was impressive what this group has actually been able to accomplish without a budget, with a window of time. So I want to commend Karen for taking that on. And Doug, thank you for coming and listening. And I don't have too much to add, but because Karen, she really did a thorough job.
Thank you, Karen.
Yeah, sure.
Any questions from anyone? Any comments? All right, so Karen is up again. Karen was very busy.
Very busy.
If we move on to the item,
Policing
the
or the
police-
roundtable?
well, the police
police.
interviews.
So I think you all know that Lieutenant Esposito had reached out to Nancy and said, hey, do people from your task force or individuals from your task force want to come as
hold on a second. Did we ever at a meeting go over that we met with him before? Did we tell you all that about the time that we met with him before? Do you all know about that?
About the traffic stop.
Okay, so after the last meeting, I guess it was, seems like so long ago, where I brought up the traffic stop at the meeting, the chief reached out to me and said, you know, we put together a presentation for the family and we would like to invite you in to come and see it. So I went with Bev and Karen, and we actually got to see the presentation and we talked through the stop, and it felt very fruitful. I think, you know, they were very receptive to, you know, our perspective about what we saw on the call. I did feel like when we started the meeting, they kind of had one view, and then by the end, I think we'd come to like another understanding. And I think the understanding that I felt like we walked away with from it was that, you know, they agreed that this was an implicit bias issue, that the officers, and they actually used those words, that the officers did show bias in their selection of the stop. And then we talked through how that can happen, and it's, you know, it's not that they're good or bad people, it's just their brains filled in something that wasn't there, and unfortunately the reaction to that is they ruined somebody else's day, and so they took accountability for that.
I have to say, like, that's something I think people should hear, the fact that they sort of owned up to it, because that's not easy to do.
And they did go back and follow up with the family and did say that to them, that they recognized that there was implicit bias at play, and that that's something that they are going to look at. And so
And the officers too, the officers went to the family's house, they owned up to it, and the chief did, and internal affairs did, and they wanted to use it sort of as teaching, like all of this bias training work that they've been doing. They're like, by the way, all of this training and this still happened. So clearly there's something not connecting from the current trainings that they have in place when, oh yeah, the problem with implicit bias is you can't necessarily train it out of you, you know, because you've taken a class. That's just not how that works.
And
so they're learning real time.
And I also just think that the parallel opportunity here is, it seems to be such a triggering concept community-wide, that there is this implicit bias. And I think for the police department to come out front and say, yeah, we experienced this, like, it didn't kill them, it's making them stronger, we're growing. And I think for whatever reason, just some of the inbound we've seen when the superintendent, that issue, like, one of the things that was so triggering was that he explained that we all have this implicit bias, and people push back on that. And I think that this could go a really, really long way with helping a community conversation. Like, it's okay to admit this.
Well, I think what I found really interesting is, you know, they recognize that we weren't there to tell them how to do police work. We were there to tell them, we were there to talk about, you know, why that these things are not accidental. It's not accidental that two people made the same mistake, and that mistake came from someplace else, and that it wasn't just kind of out of nowhere that they both made the same mistake. And to their endless credit, not only did they, you know, during the meeting, they actually said to us, you know, we've been to trainings, but we actually found this to be really helpful to us. We actually feel like we're walking away learning something. And that was really, you know, I walked out of that feeling like, oh, that's great. And then to kind of get a phone call later to, you know, they reached out to Nancy and asked us to participate in the interviews as civilians. Again, I think shows that, you know, there were no hard feelings. I mean, when it comes to working with the police, that they're very receptive and open to hearing another perspective. I think that's how they're interpreting it. They're interpreting it as, these are some voices that maybe are not at the table, and we would just like to hear your opinions and hear about how, you know, how these things look to somebody who's not one of us. And that's not to say that we think that your opinion is more important than ours. It's just, we're willing to listen. And so they had us come to the meeting. Karen went twice, I went once.
And the arc of where we've come in the last few months is not something, I think it's something to really talk about or just acknowledge, because I think that's a really big step that I feel like was impactful from this group and the work of this group.
Yeah, I think, you know, interesting in that, you know, we had this sort of critical issue with the working with the committee that put the chief into his current position, and then the chief turns around and says, no, that would have been fine. And not only would that be fine, like I'd like to keep that going. And
Yeah,
so
he's open to it.
so he not only was he open to, so he invited us, and all of the things that we heard about it being HR issues sort of just stopped existing. And so it was really, I thought it was a really interesting process. I think I highly recommend if there's another opportunity, you do it. There were 4 police officers and 2 civilians. One person, it was me or Karen, and then there was someone from social services. I think there was a different person every day. And they were really, gracious to us, and they were interested in our opinions about things. And the way it works is the recruits come in, we asked a series of questions that were predetermined. We had the opportunity to come up with a question that we drafted about the police accountability bill. So I was actually the person to read the question to ask them about accountability, which I thought was really interesting for me to get that experience.
And that question, real quick on that, one of the officers said he was recently interviewed for a lieutenant's position. So kind of prior to a promotion, you have to go through this interview process, and that the very style of question we asked about the police accountability bill was on the exam to become a lieutenant. So the question itself wasn't terribly unfamiliar. So anyway, so the question that they actually were all on board with the question. That was also pretty rewarding is not really the right word for all of this, but it's the incremental steps, the inviting us in to discuss the inappropriate stop of the gentleman from town. It was the inviting us into the interviewing process. It was the inviting us to contribute to a question, and then engaging with us really for the 3 days in dialogue about how equity plays out in the interviewing process, how their recruitment of potential candidates can be improved, and they were really looking to us for suggestions. It was very much like we were real-time resources for them that they appreciated and valued. So,
and then not only that, after at the end, talking to Lieutenant Esposito, was absolutely lovely the entire process. He was great to work with. Talking about ideas about things that they may want to change about the process to make the process feel more equitable. And so he said that this was not just like, he doesn't want this to be a one-off. He wants continued. He wants the relationship to continue, because he recognizes that it is just about just opening up the tent a little bit. And so they invited us to. We're going to talk a little bit more about his development of this process, but then in addition, as a result of this stop, they're having another training in the fall on the art of perception. Someone who has been training NYPD on perception and bias, and that's something that they've already committed to having 40 officers do. So, this is sort of the best case scenario, right? Like, we have a situation that feels like someone in town felt like something wasn't fair, and we helped them figure out how to make it more fair over the course of time. We kept it looking at it through an equity lens, and so that ultimately feels like a step in the right direction. And I think it was really great that we were able to just be a part of that. And the hope is that when there is a full-time task force, this will happen all the time. That this is something that it could be a resource for any office that wants to just take a closer look at their practices and see if there's any improvements that they can make. And I felt like I followed up with Lieutenant Esposito after, and he felt respected in the process. I felt respected in the process. It felt like what the promise of what we said that we're supposed to be doing.
And it reminds me that we were offered an opportunity, and I think this interview process sounds like it was even further developed when they were looking for a new position. And I'm sorry, I can't remember the department. They were hiring a search firm, and we were invited, and I put it out to the group, and I don't know if it was timing or what, but nobody from the group was able to do it. But it was to talk to the search firm about the kinds of things that they might look for through an equity lens. And here it's a step further where we were invited into the room.
You better remember that, get that data point to me.
Yeah, because I think
forgot about
that's, it's really important. And I think part of it was like, it was still not that it was half baked, because I think the intention was there to hear from us. But I think we didn't have the right mechanism. But again, now a step further, being invited into the room is a real big step. And anyone have questions for Gina or Karen or comment? Okay, moving right along. Community conversation. I've heard great feedback. I'm sorry I was not with all of you. Gina, do you want to talk about sort of the evolution of it a little bit? Is that important? About the format?
You know, formatting was annoying as always. You know, there was the reason why we had to cancel the first one because of FOIA rules, and
Betsy's on.
you know,
Oh, and
first of all,
Matt's on
yeah,
too.
Betsy, Matt, and Trina
Oh, they're all-
did
all of our
a
friends are-
phenomenal job.
Yeah, thank you all
Putting
so
it
much.
together.
Great
I thank
feedback.
you
Great
for
feedback.
dealing with the 8 million emails back and forth. This is like one of those examples of something that looks so simple at its face, but then, you know, I open up my emails and I see that there's like a thread of like 40 emails, and then I just close my laptop and I say, they've got it. But yeah, it was complicated. But we wound up
All in
doing
the
it.
name, for people who aren't following, all in the name of transparency and making sure that all of this is done with FOIA in mind, the Freedom of Information Act. So it's all public information. It's all done so the public can access it. And ultimately, we made the decision to delay because we didn't want anyone to come back and say, well, you weren't fair. You weren't equitable in your process. We couldn't access the meeting. It was exclusive. So the decision was made to delay so that we could properly notice it.
And we also wanted to, for those of you who didn't know the kind of, you know, weren't in the weeds with us also, we opted to go to WebEx to have an added layer of security because we were publicizing this meeting a little bit differently. It was going on social media that we're having this roundtable discussion. And after the Zoom bombing, one of the things that our first select woman had said was, oh, well, usually when people want to make public comment, we have them pre-register in advance as a kind of an extra step to take, that they have to pre-register if they want to make public comment. Otherwise, they can just listen in. So what we wanted to be able to have people who are attending the roundtable participate and be free to either share stories or share comments on what we're talking about with the blueprint, but we wanted to do it in a way that was safe for task force members who had experienced the Zoom bombing previously. So a lot of that was kind of the behind the scenes, what was feeding our work to handle it during WebEx. And it's complicated and required a lot of phone calls to understand not just FOIA protocol, but then WebEx protocol and how to handle the registration. And it was log in and, oh, by the way, you figure out WebEx by yourself. So Betsy and I are like, all right, what do we check? It was all very complicated, but I think in the end, the format served us very well because we had 60 some odd people registering via WebEx, and then we had an additional 10 people listening in. So it was a very highly attended meeting in town. One of the most, I think, highly attended meetings in town all year. If not the.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, I think ultimately, because even at the last minute, there was still some FOIA concerns after we made the change. It was obviously the right decision. I now know we have a state FOIA officer. I've spoken to him a bunch of times. That was new for me. But yeah, so that was just the technical side of it. In terms of the presentation itself, I think it went really well. We had a lot of participation, which I was concerned about, but I think we heard there were a number of people who came on and told their stories, and a theme that really came across was some of the issues around McKinley. I think there's been a lot of there were a lot of parents on the call who spoke about just different things that have happened in relation to their, you know, people telling them they shouldn't buy a house near McKinley, or teachers, you know, being insensitive to students' needs as a student, as a BIPOC student. So there was a lot of talk around that, and it was, it's interesting because our work is really we are separate. Like stuff that goes on the board of ed is not really 100% under our purview, but then the budget is like, how much of the budget goes toward the schools?
Two-thirds, it's like 100.
Right. So, with 2/3 of the budget going toward the schools, it does seem,
like 60 something.
that seems to be something that, the constituents of this town are very concerned about. They're very concerned about the education that their children are getting here in Fairfield. There was one story that stuck with me about a woman whose husband went to register their marriage, and just how he felt that the clerk, they both wound up in tears because of their treatment with trying to get their marriage registered. And so, I think it felt really powerful to hear people use their voices in that way, to speak their truths. And we did kind of give them our blueprint. Sort of sneak peek was really about the process, about how we, the questions that we use and how we work through that. So I think that the feedback has been positive. We haven't gotten any negative feedback, actually. It's all been positive, so that was good. But there were a lot of you on the call, so I don't know, I was talking, so I don't know how it went. I don't know if you want to kind of tell people your perception of how it went. Anyone who was listening, because a lot of you were on the call. Anyone?
I don't mention them.
It's Doug again. I was on it. I'm sure if anyone else wants to say something, but I agree with you, Gina. A lot of it was focused on the schools. I'd say not just McKinley, but certainly that was the focus, but it sort of, leaked out into the whole school system. And there were some really, tactically, I think we need to leverage the parents. We need to find a way to really, find a way to get them involved in this in a formal way. There were some really moving stories. The one that stuck with me, aside from the marriage certificate one, was the child of the biracial couple who wondered if the family was going to break up or whether mom would love her anymore because she was the wrong color, because she'd read a book in the school but somehow had that issue. And just, it really sort of hit home just how damaging some of these things are to kids and how that lives on and on and on in kids and the way they feel about themselves. And there's your impact on the whole town issue. We're raising kids who are, hurt that way. Literally hurt. They become citizens of Fairfield, and that if we're trying to explain it, why this matters to everybody, I think this is one source of information that might get through some of the defenses. I thought it was really well done. I was a little worried about how it was all going to go, just given what we've been through, but I thought it was moving and powerful and, really well done. And you guys worked really hard on it. So thanks for doing that.
I think there are people in town who really, really appreciated having the ability to get these stories out. It's hard to hold on to, I think. Yeah. So that went really well. I think, we're going to be incorporating some of those stories into the blueprint because one thing, Matt, sorry.
I didn't mean to cut you off, Gina. Thanks. So Matt Danzer.
Say your name.
Yeah, Matt Danzer. Is it easy to hear me?
Yes. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I was just gonna thank the task force members. I know there was some reluctance initially about doing this, especially given past experiences between the Zoom bombing and the way certain town entities had treated the task force in certain issues, and also always the risk that people will come to a meeting like this in bad faith or with questions that themselves hurt people. but you all took a chance, and I did get to attend live, but I did watch the recording afterwards, and I thought the event was beautiful for what people were willing to share, for what everyone was learned on the during the meeting, and so I just appreciate you all taking that chance to listen to the town.
Thank you. I'm glad that you pushed us to do it. I mean, sometimes I think having, this is why, again, having different voices at the table is important, because I think, you advocated for us to do this. And, sometimes it takes that outside perspective, and to remember that we do serve the town. And as much as like sometimes dealing with the powers that be can be so frustrating and demoralizing, at the end of the day, I mean, I think I probably felt better about being on this task force in the last week than I had in a really long time. And it was primarily because I could see right in front of me what we were doing and how much people really want us to continue this work.
And that feels like, Matt, to that point, I feel like those of you who help us in that way, who are not on the task force, again, Betsy, who really tried, to get my head around WebEx by having all those preliminary phone calls, and Trinia, who, read the Pledge of Allegiance for us, and Matt, who, rallied for us for even doing this when you can tell we were a little bit exhausted and jaded. You're like the people handing out the water to the runners in the marathon, right? You're like the people who are like, you got this, you can do this, here's some water. And all of those little things that you guys do, and Ryan, every time you show up and always show up and take these minutes, and you're like fueling us forward and allowing us to keep doing this work, because I think as a task force, we've had these lulls where we've run out of steam. So gratitude for you guys, because it's a big deal.
For sure.
I also think it's a great reminder, listening to the community, and I'm sorry I couldn't be present at the moment. I think it's a reminder that the government process can be a frustrating one for people outside of it. And to know that this work has to exist, both within the framework of government, because that is what will codify it and allow us to make certain changes, but that there's also, of course, the need, it's like it has to exist in parallel paths. And it's a reminder that this work obviously existed before we were formed. It will have to continue. And listening to or reading what Jamie had written, that she's doing this work outside of this group in a really important way. Like, I think to echo what Gina is saying and Karen is saying, it's just a nice reminder that there are bigger forces at play. We're not in this little isolated bubble. We have one function right now, and it's a good reminder that we're collecting really good, important information that's going to inform more work.
Yeah.
So for me, not that I specifically was invigorated because I wasn't there, but again, a reminder that this is just one small piece of the pie that is so important, but it will exist and needs to exist outside of this. Sorry, Betsy, you have your hand up.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I'm traveling. I just want to echo sort of everything, but also something just kind of occurred to me as I was listening and thinking through too. As much as community support of the task force, it's important. What I realized with that, the roundtable, is that the task force is also serving, in a way, at least for me personally, to validate within my network and my groups that this is not just a Betsy issue, this is not just my family issue, this is much broader, and people are really doing real things about it. And it really, to be able to forward the link with, what you created, Karen, to this, even though very few of in my close circle attended, to be able to send that out and say, there's a lot going on, and this is really important stuff, is I think really, really powerful too. And that I think we can keep going in different ways. So I just wanted to put that in there too, and just you guys for putting that on and doing the hard work. And I'm just so grateful this meeting is so positive today. You guys deserve it. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. So another thing that has happened in the interim is Kathy, Wyan, and Bev, who have been putting on their hats to really look at what we've put together so far. They met with some former town attorneys, and Kathy had, she really, and I think I'm gonna need your help with this, Karen. She called me and she wanted to kind of stress to us that, as a task force, this idea that we are not empowered is rather typical, apparently, of all task forces. They really don't, and that our job is, and I think this was like a good reminder for me, that our job is to persuade. That ultimately the goal of this task force is going to be to, because of the way our town is structured, to persuade the first select woman that she should get behind the things that we're asking her to get behind. And so in thinking about how we present, we really have to think about making it a persuasive document that feels like we are, making a convincing argument that cannot be denied. I think it was, is that there?
Yeah, and the importance of, it feels so weird saying this out loud at the public meeting that can be listened to, but the importance of not just being persuasive, but also validating the importance of having set up the task force in the first place. So those two things kind of working concurrently are how, when we go to present to the Board of Selectmen, it is not just a persuasive thing, but basically like, we're so glad that you established this task force because it's really important. So kind of circling back around to the fact that it was even established in the first place was really actually an important first step, and kind of validating that at the same time we're persuading. So there's definitely,
And there's
yeah.
Well, there's also a few steps. I mean, there's the document, there's obviously the content, the language, the semantics, which will at some point all have to parse through and get to a majority place with that. There is the way it looks, so that you physically are looking at something and it's digestible and pretty. And then it's how we present it. In my day job, in the business of hearing pitches all the time, I mean, we're selling a story.
Yeah.
And a narrative.
Yeah.
And so I think that there is going to have to be a moment where we all decide how we are presenting that story and how we're telling that story. And so I imagine at an agenda, on a meeting at some point, and again, we'll have to think about FOIA and how we do this, so that we're not sort of burying the lead or whatever.
Yeah.
And maybe we divide it up in sections, but we're going to have to divvy out and give assign roles and sections and what it is. And at some point we talked about a top sheet and a summary sheet.
Yeah.
We'll need to pull out and parse out the key points, because we basically will get one chance to make a first impression about this particular document. And so that's something that, we have to think about. We don't obviously have to make decisions on that today, but I think if we start thinking about this in terms of a story we're telling and a narrative, then it will get easier to think about how we're both physically presenting the document and talking about it.
Yeah.
And it goes back to this idea that the community conversation, I think at some point we're going to want to have another conversation once we have a blueprint, and kind of before presenting it to the Board of Selectmen, just kind of hear people's feedback and take in. I think where we'll have the most success is if we take any questions and get them, and not be afraid to get the questions.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and I think, to that end, I think going back to just what we learned in the last meeting when you presented is that they want specific data. So, making sure that when we talk about police ops, there will actually be the numbers, the numbers that we have we'll use. And that, that tells us that is what he's saying that that's what he needs to be persuaded. So we find if they exist, we use the ones that exist. We don't, obviously we can't rely on that across the board because that doesn't always work that way. But, I think just being kind of forward thinking about this is a persuasive document, I think we have to think about how do we make sure that they're hearing the things that they need to hear.
And just for the record, I'm sorry, Betsy, I don't know if you announced yourself, but for the record, Betsy McNeil was the one commenting. Someone had just texted me to ask who was speaking. Then it's me, Nancy. And it was before that, it was Karen. Sorry. Thank you for, we did move fast and all of that. Anything anyone want to talk about? I mean, we sort of meshed the agenda items from the community conversation into the blueprint next steps. Do you want to talk, Gina, about the kind of next steps in terms of draft form, or are we?
So we have a pretty decent draft. I think we need to look at some of the language more to make sure that that's all consistent. I do think the next step is to kind of incorporate some of those stories that we heard. I also was approached by someone who is a very large employer in town who is going to be doing a very similar conversation to the one that we did internally. So that'll be another opportunity to hear from a different subset of people who work in town. So that was, I think, it just kind of fell into my lap, and I think that's something that will be great too. So that's, I think, the next phase is really kind of turning it into a more persuasive document. And again, any help would be appreciated.
Great. Anyone else have any comment, question?
I have a quick question. What are you thinking on timing? Like, when do you think will be I know you said more data collection, getting things wrapped up in a good way, but when are you kind of thinking this should?
Here's the thing, the more help I get, the faster it goes, right? Like, I mean, obviously I'm not working on this every single day because I just can't do that. So if anyone would like to help out, that it'll go faster. Right now we're gonna need help transcribing what we heard in the last meeting. So it's gonna be listening to those tapes, getting those into
Is there
audio form.
I feel like there might be a program where you can dictate software. I'm gonna look into that.
Well, there's some apps. I think I use Otter or whatever, but I'm right now, I'm in the middle of a lot of work stuff. So that would be a hard.
All right, I'm gonna volunteer to look into the transcribing piece of the stories, only because I think because my son uses it for school.
That would be great.
So I'll look at that. I may reach out to the group and say I failed here, so then we may need help transcribing, and it may mean that.
Yeah.
What we need is some of the data that we collected kind of at our fingertips, like in I don't want to say like an infographic page, but some sort of page with key data points that could help compel the story. I keep picturing again, not graphic designers, but like the traffic stops, some kind of education data point about the disparity between
Like pull quotes from.
No.
Right.
I'm talking about some sort of data in some of these bucket areas that are important, because we don't have all the data, but we have enough that's indicating. So I need somebody to look at all that data probably.
Right. Like if would anyone be willing to look through that CCM data and pull out, say, like 10 data points that they think would be great in the blueprint? So like that's the kind of help that's where we are right now. So the more people who do it.
So
Yeah.
for instance, just so I understand, we're going to include a link to the CCM overall thing, but you want to pull out
Yes.
10 salient points across our various backup material.
Yeah.
That we could kind of bold and highlight as a proof positive of something.
Right, because we're gonna have to assume that nobody's gonna read it.
Right.
No one's gonna follow all the links and do all that. So we need to make sure that we get it incorporated into the document. I know Matt, you just sent over. Christian Vahey actually sent the same thing.
It was the same thing.
yeah.
Okay.
It's an affordable housing. What's it called? Sorry.
Zoning practices. It's.
Yeah. So that's going to need to be gone through to figure out what is the Fairfield centric data that can be pulled forth.
So like, for instance, again, Matt, thank you for sending that. Kristen had sent it. We'll have an attachment, a link as part of the blueprint, but it's
Yeah.
185 pages.
And so, timeline, if you were expecting me to do it by myself, I got to read 185 pages. So that's going to take a while. So if anyone would like to take that on, that will definitely shorten our timeline.
And I wasn't pushing or trying to, imply that anybody need to get it done quicker. I was just trying to, do we think this is something we're going to get done towards the end of the year? Do you think, the summertime, people are vacationing. I know I have vacation coming up. The summer's probably going to be slow.
In my mind, like the start of a new school year, like I would love to be going into the fall, having turned this in so that there's an opportunity, because that's kind of when the next budget cycle starts. It gives Brenda an opportunity to digest it. It's like we're back to school. There's obviously information on the education piece. So, but again, that relies on this group being able to.
Because I agree. I would love to get this wrapped up. I start a new job in September and I am a ghost. None of you will see me for until next summer. So yeah, I would love to get it wrapped up by the end of summer. So
I think we've also talked, Jason, about we're kind of at this point now where maybe we don't, like the next meeting, for instance, maybe we don't need to have the next meeting, because what we really need is
Time spent on doing this.
time spent on the blueprint, on different parts of the blueprint. I've been trying to get in there, for instance, and expanding on some of the key dates, the key things that have happened, like a timeline or whatever. So I keep going in there. I've done a lot of adding. Gina's done a lot of sculpting and adding, but I think at any given point, if any of you on the task force can say, hey, I have a couple hours today, what can I do? What can I do on the blueprint?
Not
That
just
would
the
be
task
great.
force. I mean,
Or,
there
yeah,
are ad
anybody.
hoc members. I mean, I think Kathy would be really good at some of this, and Jamie, and we're not limited to just the nine of
Yeah.
us.
So
Because we all want to get it done. I think we wanted to get it done in May, right? I know I did.
Yeah.
It's just it's a big lift for those of us who are not experts in the document creation, in and of itself. Like we've all done them.
I mean,
in various ways, shapes, and forms, but this is a big report that we're trying to deal with. And then at some point, not only do we want to finish the report, but we have to get a presentation ready. So we have to extrapolate from the report into something that we can present.
we have to practice.
And we have to practice. So we're, I think that's really the point that we're at. The push point we're at right now is hands up to roll up sleeves and help.
And I guess this is, me being a cheerleader here, we always knew this was a marathon, not a sprint, but this is in some ways the wall that they talk about. Like, we got to break through this, because this is right here, this is what it's coming down to. Like, if we don't get the involvement, the support, we'll get there eventually. It's just, again, this is the part where the team, there's no I in team piece, is really going to be critical.
So Matt has stepped up to look through the zoning. Thank you very much, Matt. I appreciate that. That's great. One less thing off the list.
Great.
Thank you, Matt. Yeah, so really, if you've got some time, reach out, let us, it'll be helpful.
So I guess with that, we don't need to vote on this, because as the co-chairs, we get to make the determination about a next meeting, but certainly for the next meeting, which is scheduled for July 13th, I think Gina and I talked, and it's our intention to cancel that meeting, to give us an opportunity to give you time that you would spend at that meeting to perhaps invest in looking at a draft or pulling some points. So again, don't be surprised if a meeting cancellation comes your way in your inbox. And if you need a minute to think about it, we're going to give it to you, because there's no choice. But this is our call to all of you.
Yeah, I think really, because the work we have to do now is really get this blueprint done. So
and by the way, like, we're still adding, as you said, like I'm going to look at the transcribing thing. There's still things that we're adding. Like, if there's another community conversation within this organization, like it is a fluid document, but at some point we're going to have to wrap it up.
Yeah, And I think, it's not about being precious about it, for sure.
Right.
Like, I think for the most part, Kathy's feedback was really important about making it more of a persuasive document than a sort of factual document. That kind of shapes a little bit.
I also know that my tendency is to like get in my own way. I think this is not going to be perfect. It's going to be a next step. And I want to refer back to when we were saying, like, this is a moment and it's one next step. It's not going to be the end of this work. It's not going to be the end all be all. It's going to be another opportunity for the town to decide. Yes, they're on board. No, they're not. Yes, we like these points or these points. I mean, it's not going to be perfect and it's not going to be right for all people. And we had referred to this notion when Karen presented to the Board of Selectmen. There are going to be people that this won't resonate. There are going to be people who resonate with 5 points, with 10. Like, the point is that we can't let that now get in the way of actually the delivery of it. So with that, anyone have a comment? Doug, you look like you want to say something.
Yeah,
Just announce your name.
I'm
Sorry.
Doug Bunnell again. It feels a little bit, so just if I'm wrong, tell me, that we've drifted back in the direction of feeling like we need to sort of come up with the numbers and give them or get them into the report. It felt like we were at a point where we were saying we need to be permanently constituted and then get the numbers.
No,
So
I don't think it's coming up with the numbers at all. I think it's more that, whereas before I thought we could just link to the report, I think in order to make it persuasive, we should probably pull the
numbers
existing
out.
data out. So I'm really talking about data that's already there.
That we're linking to anyway.
Yeah, that we were linking to anyway. It's just taking it out of the
prominent or highlighting it more specific. Okay.
That's why I took the time for myself to explain it out loud. Like, what Matt just volunteered to do is there's a document on zoning. It's 185 pages. We will have a link to it in the blueprint under whatever appropriate category. But Matt, thank you, is going to take 10 points from that 185 pages and we'll bold them, we'll highlight them, we'll put them in a pretty box.
Yeah.
Maybe not even 10.
not.
Maybe it's
Maybe
not
it's-
10 from
right.
zoning.
Yeah.
Maybe it's 10 across the board. I feel like
Right.
we need that police
Yes.
stop data because that was important.
Yeah.
So-
And again,
Oh, sorry.
I don't know what's happening. Don't do that. Sorry, that was my family.
Oh my.
Sorry about that.
goodness.
No,
It's like,
so
what is happening?
so Doug, I haven't
Music
changed.
bombed.
Wow.
I have not changed my opinion that if you are looking for numbers to prove that there is systemic injustice in the world, I'm just not in that business. I'm not
Right.
my job is not to convince you of that. I am taking the note that in order to persuade someone who says the data is not about Fairfield, I have to show them that the data was about Fairfield. So it's
Right.
more than,
All right,
that
that makes sense to me.
there's
Thank
been
you.
other people who've done it. We're not going out and
It's
getting
just
any
how
more
we
data.
tell, again, how we frame the story so that people listen, because it's all the information is there.
Yeah.
But for the people that aren't gonna be able to enter it through an anecdotal, we're just giving them an entry point.
Right, so to that end, please sign me up or deploy me where I could be helpful. So
Excellent.
Doug.
Thank you, Doug.
Yeah, and
Yeah, who else is it?
I'll reach out directly if that's what you guys want.
Thank
Yeah,
Jason,
thank
that'd be
you
great.
all. And,
Yeah.
and yeah, we
Thank
can
you.
take a minute to marinate on where it's would be most helpful too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Even thinking about, like, another thing that would be really helpful is if the section that you worked on, if there is something that you think there's data on that we could pull, give us an idea about that. Because then it helps me not have to think about the whole thing. Yeah.
Ryan and I, this is Doug, Ryan and I have a very good number that I think will sort of hit the competitive urges in Fairfield, that at least 20 other towns in Connecticut have already issued statements on racial justice.
Perfect.
that's
Like,
great.
And that's what I keep
That's
picturing.
great.
Is that it's like,
Fairfield hasn't. So it's that
Info,
sort of stuff.
the
yeah.
numbers, you
Yeah.
know, just to.
And that that exact kind of thing is super helpful, especially at the Board of Selectmen table, because it's like, we like to see where we fit in
Yeah.
within the like more global Connecticut context.
You know, when I sort of think about like the imaginary blueprint that exists in my head, I think about having, you know, a document that has these consistent boxes in each section, kind of like when you have a textbook and they have a
Yeah.
little box with that little
Right.
light bulb on it that says, "Did you know?" And there's a fact. You know, we have like a fact like that, which is a perfect one that fits right
Yeah.
there. That says, you know, after we talk about it, that.
Yeah.
I just,
Here's the 20 towns, 20 surrounding towns that
Right.
issued a proclamation.
yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, Jason.
This is Jason Sherrod. Doug, to elaborate on that, I'm wondering if you could find out how many towns have allocated budget. More importantly than just the executive statement, but who's allocated budget towards something like this? That would be a great thing to find out. I'd be happy to help you out, too, if
That's
you have
great.
that data point.
That's where I think we need the permanently constituted task force, because it's extraordinarily difficult to me, because I'm a, you know, Neanderthal, to figure out how to get into the town agendas and stuff and figure that out. But
No, I
I'll
would,
take a shot at it, but
I wouldn't do that, but I would. Someone else might be keeping track. Like
maybe, yeah, okay.
you know,
Or
like
you go to a town budget, maybe there's a way to Google, because all the budgets are public information. It maybe someone else's.
Hey, Doug, I'd be happy to help you with that. I'm just saying, I think that's a.
No, that'd be a very powerful argument if we can come up with that, for sure. Yeah, okay, sure.
Like
those
diversity.
20 towns, and how many of those 20 towns have a budget?
Right.
Probably zero, but,
Yeah.
but, you know,
You
Look
never
at
know.
if a town is employed in inclusion or diversity department, like. if
department, but, yeah.
that's our chart.
So I mean, again, we don't have to like we're not reinventing any wheels here.
Right.
You know, like if that's cumbersome, then we'll just move on, and that just won't be data that we have. But I think just to kind of keep that in mind.
Yeah.
Because that, I mean, that information might be with CCM.
Right.
Yeah, CCM might.
Like they may have it already. We just didn't think to ask. So that's just a question to ask them. But
Which of us has been in touch with CCM? Is it Steve?
Yeah.
Is Steve? Like,
He's
He was
muted.
listening
He's
in.
listening.
He said he's
muted.
So Steve, that's a great CCM if you're.
Steve, if you can hear us, maybe you can talk to Jason and Doug about like the questions for CCM, things, data points we can get from CCM.
Yeah, so we're rocking and rolling. Thank you. That's awesome. What's the next?
I mean, that's it. Does anyone have anything else they wanted to add about this before we kind of move on to ask if there's other items? All right, anyone have anything else they want to say?
Yeah, so I don't know if you're all familiar with do you want to talk about the PTA Council?
I
That's
can.
kind of interesting.
Yeah, Bessie's still on, right? So the PTA Council this year has a very strong cohort going of kind of DEI liaisons at each of these schools in town. And so we've been meeting a couple of times already. We had kind of an introductory meeting, then we met again last night. So even though my daughter will be a senior and she's my final student to push through the public schools, I will help out at Ward with a woman named Britta Belli. I think that's her name, her last name. Anyway, not important little detail right now. Anyway, so there'll be two of us at Ward. I think there's two folks at Ludlow. And then there's somebody from each of the middle schools, and then all of the elementary schools, one or two people representing each school. And so what we're doing this summer is getting immersed in the PTA learning in the DEI space. PTA as a resource has some great webinars, great training, and then also just strong talking points to not just diversify, you know, the leadership of the PTA, but basically identify where the school is on a continuum from kind of whether they're still in the colorblind portion of the program, or are they being inclusive, or are they getting to equity on their way to, you know, full equality kind of thing. There's this whole spectrum. And, you know, identifying where your school is. And so we're talking a lot about some of the steps that we can take last night. But for me, one of the biggest things, and I raised this at the meeting last night, is the DEI liaisons will be at each PTA meeting, sharing out the work that's being done in town in this space. So not just working with the kids, you know, like Andrew, for instance, will be working with the, you know, the Ludlow kids, but also being able to go to that meeting and sharing to a PTA audience, here's kind of the equity work that's happening in town. And I think that might be one of the most powerful things that will happen, because we actually will have this voice at each of the schools once a month. And anyway, so that's a pretty cool, interesting thing. Jennifer Elwood is the PTA council rep that's kind of spearheading it, for those of you who know Jennifer, or know that Jennifer, of all the Jennifers. And she's really fantastic. She's a McKinley mom who's very passionate right now, and you know, anxious to be focusing on this, you know, to the detriment of any other interest or activity she has in her life. So yeah, so I think, yeah, it's a pretty sweet group of people that are all going to be working, just sharing out at the schools too. So I'm kind of staying abreast of education budget, and sort of like what we did at the police station, which was just be a presence in the police department during their practices. But now we're going to have, you know, kind of an audience in the schools, and we'll be fielding probably a lot of questions at those meetings each month. That's for sure. That's my guess.
Yeah.
So that's
Anyone else?
I think, I know Andrew hung up, but I think that the high school groups are going to be doing a Fairfield Pride event tomorrow at the town green. So they put together an event. So if you're in town, say hello to our youth who are out there and constantly telling us we adults need to do a better job than them. That's exactly what they keep saying. You need to do a better job than we are.
My kids tell me that all the time.
Yeah.
So, anyone have anything else before we? All right. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn. Does Jason?
Is there a second?
well, I'll second it,
Karen will second it. All in favor? Aye.
All right.
Okay, any abstentions or, I know, no one's gonna object. So, all right.
So the other thing that has not been said that we would like to say is clearly we're meeting in person. We would like to maybe try to
Oh, yeah.
move one of our next meetings to in person so we can all be in the same room, because we are slowly creeping and there'll be more and more of us. So we may have the next, if we can, may have the next meeting.
Figure out how to
See if
do
we can
that
have the
with
next
town.
meeting in person.
We'll give a hybrid option for those.
Yeah.
All right, bye.
Right.